Once upon a time, one empire ruled the seas, commanded global trade, and controlled nearly a quarter of the world's population. From the streets of London to the jungles of India, from African deserts to Caribbean islands, the British flag flew across continents. They called it the empire where the sun never set. Britain did not begin as a superpower. It was a small island, constantly threatened by stronger European rivals. But geography became its greatest weapon. Being surrounded by water forced Britain to master the seas. A powerful navy protected trade. Trade created wealth, and wealth built empire. Before Britain ruled distant lands, it first tightened control over nearby Ireland. Across the Atlantic, it built colonies in North America, starting with Jamestown in 1607. But these were only early steps. The real rise of British power came from India. In 1600, the British East India Company was created to trade with Asia. Its first trading post in India opened at Surat in 1612, followed by Madras in 1639, Bombay in 1668, and Calcutta in 1690. At first, the company was only a merchant. But as the Mughal Empire weakened, the company became a political power. It built armies, fought local rulers, and defeated rival Europeans. In 1757, after the Battle of Plassey, it took control of Bengal, one of the richest regions on earth. This single victory transformed Britain's future. Indian tax revenues, raw materials, and manpower now flowed into British-controlled systems. Indian wealth helped finance British factories, railways, and global trade networks. By the early 1800s, the East India Company ruled most of the subcontinent, not as a nation, but as a corporation. After a massive rebellion in 1857, the British government took direct control of India in 1858. This began the era of the British Raj. India became the backbone of British global power. Indian taxes funded imperial administration. Indian soldiers fought in British wars across the world. Indian raw materials fed British industries. As long as Britain controlled India, it could remain a global empire. At the same time, Britain expanded elsewhere, in Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, securing ports and trade routes that supported the Indian trade network. By the mid-1800s, Britain dominated global commerce, finance, and naval power. At home, the Industrial Revolution turned Britain into the world's factory. Coal-powered steam engines, railways connected cities. Factories produced textiles, steel, ships, and weapons on massive scale. London became the financial center of the world. Banks, insurers, and shipping firms financed global trade. The Royal Navy protected it all. By the 19th century, Britain stood as the strongest global power on Earth. But beneath this dominance, serious problems were growing. Colonial economies were designed for extraction, not development. Poverty, famine, and inequality created deep resentment. In India, political movements demanded rights and self-rule. Mass protests and civil resistance weakened British authority. Then came the wars that Britain could not avoid. World War I drained Britain's economy and manpower. Millions of soldiers from Britain and India were sent to fight. Britain won, but emerged heavily in debt and economically weakened. World War II was even more devastating. British cities were bombed, industries were damaged, and survival depended on massive American support. When the war ended, Britain was nearly bankrupt. To keep fighting, Britain had sold overseas assets and borrowed heavily from the United States. American wartime aid stopped. Now Britain had to repay loans and compete in a global market. In 1946, Britain took a massive loan from the United States, but the deal came with strict economic conditions. Britain had to open its markets, reduce currency controls, and weaken its colonial trade systems. This made protecting British industries harder and made maintaining a global empire financially impossible. At the same time, the United States was building a new global order. Through institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, global finance moved under American leadership. The U.S. promoted open trade and independent nations, not closed colonial systems controlled by European empires. This was not about revenge for American independence. By this time, the U.S. saw itself as a separate global power, with its own economic and strategic goals. Decolonization allowed American companies to enter markets that had once been reserved for British firms. Then came the moment that proved Britain was no longer a true superpower. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, Egypt's president, Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalized the Suez Canal, one of the most important trade routes between Europe and Asia. Britain and France secretly planned a military operation with Israel. Israel invaded Egypt, and Britain and France followed, claiming they were restoring order. Militarily, Britain and France were winning on the ground, but the United States refused to support the invasion. Instead of sending troops, America used financial pressure. The U.S. threatened to block emergency loans, refuse International Monetary Fund support, and sell British currency, which would crash the pound. Britain's economy could not survive another financial crisis. So even while British troops were still advancing, the government was forced to order an immediate withdrawal, not because Britain lost the war, but because it could not afford to continue without American backing. From that moment on, Britain stopped launching major independent global military operations. It began aligning closely with U.S. foreign policy, and its role shifted from empire to junior partner in Western alliances. To the rest of the world, especially former colonies, the message was clear. Britain was no longer the ultimate authority. Real power now belonged to Washington. Many historians consider Suez the moment Britain stopped being a true superpower. Meanwhile, resistance inside the empire became unstoppable. In India, strikes, protests, and political pressure made colonial rule impossible to sustain. In 1947, Britain finally left India and Pakistan, ending nearly 2 centuries of control. This was the true breaking point of British power. Without India, Britain lost its largest source of revenue, manpower, and influence. Once India was gone, the rest of the empire could not be held. Across Africa, in the 1950s and 1960s, colonies gained independence. Across Asia and the Caribbean, British rule ended. Ireland had already broken away in 1922, leaving only Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom. The empire collapsed, not through one great military defeat, but through economic exhaustion and political resistance. Global leadership shifted to new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Britain remained influential, but no longer controlled world trade, finance, or military power. Yet British dominance left lasting marks. English became the world's global language. Parliamentary systems spread across continents. Railways, legal systems, and trade networks still shape modern nations, but so do the consequences. Economic inequality, political divisions, and conflicts rooted in colonial borders. British power rose through ships, trade, factories, and finance. It peaked when India stood at the center of its empire, and it fell when war, resistance, and global economic shifts made empire impossible to maintain. Once, Britain ruled the oceans and markets of the world. Today, its empire exists only in history, a reminder that even the greatest global power, no matter how vast, cannot last forever.